Welcome to The Ballsy Show, where I dive into tough conversations about controversial topics that no one else wants to talk about. I chat to guests with a unique perspective who aren't afraid to speak their truth and want to explore ideas that matter. Joining me today is independent journalist Rebekah Barnett. Rebekah, thanks for your time. We chatted briefly yesterday and I thought you actually had an English accent. So can you share with our viewers and listeners exactly what your reply was?
Look, the truth is I'm 100% Aussie, but my parents used to drill me. So it was a bit like, the movies of kids at boarding school when they get made to say, "How now, brown cow?" And I used to have to stop my sentence if I said anything grammatically incorrect and start again from the beginning. So, yeah, I just speak properly because I got drilled so hard. And I do. I've always had it. People saying, "Are you from the UK?" I'm like, "No, I just speak properly."
Well, you speak a lot better than I, and I have to apologise because you'll get some ramblings, some slang, some everything from me over the next hour. But appreciate you joining me. You've got your own Substack, and for people who might be new to Substack, it's an online platform where you control your own content and obviously subscribers and followers and paid subscribers. And you're called Dystopian Down Under. How did the name
Yeah.
come about, and how did the journey start?
Yeah. It was just after mandate season kicked in really hard. I'm in Western Australia, so our mandates came in November 2021 through January 2022. And I just remember feeling like everything was upside down. In fact, have you seen Stranger Things?
A little bit. The kids are
Yeah.
into it more. I'm a bit from the older vintage.
Okay. Well,
The older
the
vintage.
upside down where everything is sort of an inversion of the upper world. That's
Yeah.
what I felt like I was living in, and I was trying to express that, and a lot of other people I was speaking to were feeling the same way. So yeah, that's how the dystopian down under, and it was sort of a play on also everything just being upside down, I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
take us through the journey of a Perth girl growing up. Were you always a why person? And when I say a why person, you strike me as someone that goes, "Why are we going to do this? What's going on
Yeah.
here? How's that?"
100%. Yeah, definitely. So always if I got told to do something, I had to know why, and at school wanted to know why. And a real book nerd, like my teachers used to all have little libraries at the back of the classroom, and I would just read the whole cabinet of books during the year, and then go to the next class, read that whole cabinet of books. Yeah, I do. I'm just a naturally super curious person. Um, and then I think I had a journey, like growing up, both my parents are quite religious, and I've gained a lot of really good things from that upbringing. But one of the things I had, whether they taught it to me or I just interpreted it this way, was I'd adopted a very judging kind of attitude where, this is right and that's wrong, and putting you into that box and putting this into that box. And I did have an experience probably throughout my 20s mainly where I really unpacked a lot of that and became a lot more open to nuance and the ability to say I don't know, or just let things just be without having to label them or judge them or whatever. Not that it's wrong to say that something's right or wrong, like that can be good too. But so what I'm saying is I started off very curious, but I think also this experience in my adulthood of learning to hold a lot of ideas at the same time and weigh them up against each other. And I would say that curiosity is more of a driver to me than the desire to put things in boxes and have it all black and white and label it. And I think that a lot of the media and a lot of the way that we do discussions in the public sphere at the moment tends to fall into these black and white tracks for all sorts of reasons. And we could talk about that if you'd like to. And maybe where I differ is I'm actually just very interested in exploring topics from all the sides and, also just understanding like, okay, some people were just bloody awful during COVID, but why? Like why did they feel that that was appropriate, and trying to see it from their point of view as well, that kind of
You,
thing.
That makes complete sense. You touched on the religion, and your parents
Mm,
are religious. What
yeah.
religion or what beliefs do they have?
Christian. So
Yep.
my dad was more in the Baptist and then Anglican tradition. So he's got like a really deep knowledge of the Bible. He does Bible studies every week or so still. And then my mum went down the Pentecostal fundamentalist route. So another funny thing about that is I think fundamentalist Christians have people stereotype them as being super rigid, which in a way fundamentalism is quite rigid, but in the Pentecostal tradition there's also a really high openness to phenomena that can't be easily explained or proven, and just high openness in general to spiritual concepts and whatnot. So I would say I came out of that with a very high tolerance for weirdness, which again is very conducive to being curious because I notice that people will tend, and this is outside of the church, this is just people will tend largely to be put off by weirdness or things that they don't understand, and they'll just want to judge it and be like, that's weird. Whereas I tend to kind of lean in and be like, what's that about?
It's
So
the
it
inquisitive
doesn't so
side
much put
kicking
me
in.
off. Hey?
It's the inquisitive side kicking in.
Yeah.
Communications degree. You went to study and
Hmm.
and then obviously started your own business. Can you give us a little insight into that journey?
Yeah. So I went and studied quite a bit later on. I was 28, and so I'd already done a bunch of stuff, worked in retail, worked in fashion, blah, blah, blah. Um, Not because I wanted to do those things so much, but I actually had a really severe eating disorder when I was younger and through my 20s, and I just couldn't get a handle on I couldn't get a handle on things like what do you actually want to do in life and how are you going to do it. Like I would say I wasn't very high functioning at that stage, but as I got into recovery and was able to kind of get a handle on everything, then I worked out, okay, what do I actually really want to do? I want to write. So I went and did this degree, not for the degree, but because I wanted, again, the curiosity thing, I wanted to actually learn the stuff. That you did at that degree. And I really loved the degree. Actually, I went to UWA here, and it was quite theoretical. So we got to get into the real nitty gritty of like, what is communication? How does it work? How do you do that in online spaces? How does the medium affect how you communicate? All of that stuff. Um, and then I finished that and was doing copywriting, like brand copywriting, marketing. And that doesn't mean copyright as in infringement of an
Yeah,
ownership and stuff. It's like the words. So instead of writing, just for people who don't know, instead of writing a book, you might write a pamphlet. You might write the copy that goes in an email, or
a real
you might
estate
write,
ad.
yeah, or the brand voice. Like when I did a lot of brand voice work. So if a brand is launching, you help them work out, what does this brand sound like? What language does it use? Who's it speaking to? What's its tone of voice? That kind of thing. Um, I did enjoy that, but I knew it wasn't really what I wanted exactly to do. I just hadn't worked out exactly what I wanted to do. And then I accidentally started a Whole Foods business. Sort of just fell into it. It sort of got a bit popular, and I did that for a while. Um, Merged with a juice company. So I was very in the wellness space for a bit there. And then once the company got a bit bigger, I was doing the marketing roles. So did, a year of marketing, and then sold out of that just before all the mandate season. And up until all of that, I was pretty, like, all the COVID stuff, I was like, oh yeah, wow, we should be safe and we should, I hadn't like clocked onto stuff yet. Um, and then when the mandate stuff came on, I was doing bits and bobs of freelance work, copywriting and the like. Um, and that's when I just suddenly had this overwhelming urge to start writing, and I started the Substack because I was so outraged at all the stuff that wasn't getting published in the media. Um, and it was just making me so mad. So to kind of find an outlet for that, I started the Substack.
So before you started, obviously there's the anger, there's the frustration. Were you prepared a little bit mentally for the kickback?
Yeah, because I'd already had it socially. So the way that Mark McGowan went about mandates here was um, designed to make you feel excluded and ostracized, and it was very conspicuous. You couldn't really have not been vaccinated and people not know in most cases because there were so many things you couldn't attend. Um, so yeah, you were sort of outed whether you wanted to be or not. Um, and then yeah, I had some friendships bust up, and yeah, in hindsight, I don't think I handled that very well. I think I was quite traumatized at the time, and I um confused, and my reason for not getting it was health reasons actually. So I was also sort of double traumatized because I I was really shocked that the government was sort of openly persecuting people in my position who genuinely couldn't take it, but genuinely couldn't get an exemption because the government had just arbitrarily decided that our, you know, conditions just didn't count. Um, so that was quite a lot to process, if you know what I mean. And then about that time, I was sort of also going and reading quite deeply. Like I was reading, for example, the transmission studies. So, and like the public assessment reports. So I knew that it hadn't been tested on people like me. I knew it hadn't been tested on pregnant women, but they were forcing it on all the pregnant women. I knew that it didn't stop transmission because all the transmission studies showed that it didn't stop transmission. And yet all of our politicians were saying, oh, you'll be safe if you're, and we also have a family member, a very close family member who has had a double lung transplant. So I was also in a heightened state of distress because I was like, Mark McGowan is telling her she'll be safe if she takes this thing and then can just go and do anything she likes. She won't be because it doesn't do what he's saying it will do. And she's actually in the very small category of people that could die from this. So, yeah, the whole thing just was very, yeah, I keep coming back to the word traumatizing because I think I was traumatized by it. And so I don't know if you had this, Warren. I just look back and I'm like, I could have handled that better. I could have handled that better. And I think I've learned from it in terms of just my expectations from some friends who just wanted to pretend everything was good. And I was not able to, I just didn't know how to respond to that. And so I blew it up,
Yeah,
if that
well,
makes sense.
no, that makes complete sense. Yeah, I had the same situation and I'd lost friendships for decades.
Mm,
You know, issues, separations with family for various reasons and issues. And the other challenge I think particularly was I found by working in that system, the media system, um,
mm,
is that you were then exposed to the other side, like you're saying, the information that was around as well. So I want to take you back to you talked about some personal health choices.
yeah.
You had an immuno um, issue. Is that what you were
Yeah,
dealing with?
yeah. So I've had a chronic pain condition for about over a decade, and some accompanying like seemingly autoimmune related stuff. I go into that basket that where they just give you names for things that don't really mean anything, like fibromyalgia, or it all that means is, oh, she has pain and we don't know why, and we're just going to call it this because we don't know what it is. And some weird neurological sort of symptoms, fatigue, and also a history of really full on reactions and freaky reactions to certain medical, like pharma interventions. Like Valium gives me palpitations and keeps me awake all night. Or, like I've ended up in emergency because of a routine procedure before. Like, so all of those things combined, along with the fact that there'd been no testing on people who were immunocompromised or had any of these conditions. I mean, my GP knew, like, when you're talking to someone and you can see on their face that they know what the right thing would be to do, but they're not going to do it.
Did
Yeah.
that shock you?
Yeah, completely. Like I was so shocked, and I really felt like I'd been thrown under the bus. Like as someone who's already sick, like as someone who's already sick, I was just shocked that I would be borderline forced. I know it's coerced, let's say, like coerced to that degree to do something that really did not look safe for someone like me. And for what? Because like I said, I'd read the study, so I knew it didn't do what they said it did.
Yeah, and how did you find dealing with the public? And when I say the average person, the mum and dad, who have no idea what you've read, and you're trying to help, and I assume you're getting brickwalled.
Yeah.
How is the mentality and the psychology around that?
I mean, I've found that unless people are curious, they're closed to it, generally speaking. So I kind of, at the time, I was just so shocked that all of this was happening and that everyone seemed to be on board with it that I was trying to just fact my way out of it. I was trying to present people with information and just like, but don't you know that da 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 da? And I found that to be highly ineffective. So after sort of after a few months of realizing, okay, the feedback from that is that that's not working, that approach, I dropped the approach and just decided to start speaking to the people who are interested and are curious and want the information. And then now I tend to just leave it actually, unless people show an interest. Like I might throw a comment out there that's sort of like I'm just testing, like, are you interested? And if they're not interested, I don't really say anything. I did find I had some friends during that period who didn't actually want to get into the facts or the nitty-gritty. But they were happy to just hear me out and let me be where I was at. And those friends I still have. So I actually personally didn't need people to agree with me on a friendship level. I just needed them to allow me to have the feelings I was having and express them. But yeah, at a broader level, I usually find people need, like, either they get injured, someone they know gets injured, or they come to some information on their own path and then get interested. Do you find that too? Like people aren't, if you just go to them and go, "Hey, here's some facts," it's not usually very effective.
Yeah, we became part of a community pretty quickly. When I say community, we knew one person, it turned into two or three and four or five, and then different groups, and then added to this Telegram group and this and that. But I must admit, it became just a real research lifestyle thing for me. And then obviously went through it, lost employment, eventually went through legal case, did all those things. That was the journey I had to go on for me personally. But I don't, this is my next question, and I've got my answer to it, but I ask you, do you regret anything in those early days? And you say you regret how do you handle it, but would you change it?
Yeah.
Because I feel I'm far more in a more authentic situation living my life.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I know that I couldn't have done anything different at the time because for me, authenticity, like I couldn't fake it and I don't wish I'd faked it. That's fine. I'm happy with that. I think, if I were to do anything differently, I think I would just be less explosive. Because I was having some pretty big feelings.
That's a journey you've got to go on though, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm a very emotional. I express that's why writing is so good for me because it's how I think, it's how I process. So I'm definitely an external processor. And so when I'm feeling traumatized, that's how I behave. I behave traumatized. I think what I had hoped that I would get from friends when I behaved in a traumatized manner was that they would say, "Are you okay?" And the ones who said, "Are you okay?" I'm still friends with. It's the ones who judged me and shut me out or responded in a bitchy manner, like, "Oh my God, what's your problem?" Like that kind of response, I then wasn't able to maintain that. So, in a way, it was probably not the end of the world that I behaved. Like at the end of the day, your real true soul friends will say, "Are you okay? You seem really not okay." you know?
Yeah, and that's the authentic bit. And for me, I wouldn't change anything over the last few years. And whilst it's been incredibly hard, it's
Yeah.
authentic, and you realise how you live your previous life, whether it's reading sport on the news or being a former player, or for me being a dad and all that. You were just in the rat race, chasing the next thing, being happy, being comfortable. And what I've learned, particularly when all that ends and there's no money coming in instantly, you're then forced to go inward. How much of
Mm.
you talk about being external? How much of is it forced you to go inward to look for the answers?
Yeah, a lot. I th I think, I mean, I've always been brought up with a spiritual tradition. I've always had that, um, as part of how I do life anyway. But I think the confusing bit during that period was, am I doing the wrong thing? Am I being unreasonable? Am I being a bad person? Where you genuinely wonder that about yourself. I certainly did. Um, and, I was like, am I putting everyone at danger? Am I selfish? Am I really, all of that. And then once you sort of work out, no, authentically, this is the only thing I can do. And it sounds like you and I had a similar sort of approach there where I was just like, it's the only path I can take. There is no other path I can take authentically in this situation. So, once I made that decision and committed to it, um, I'd say like I I think what was really good about that experience was I stopped getting validation from externals, or certainly that quietened down a lot. And because you just get that sort of inner knowing, like, not necessarily that I'm right, but that I'm being so honest and so true to what I believe is the only thing I can do, that actually instills quite a great deal of confidence. Um, and then, yeah, so there was the stopping the externals. And then another thing that happened for me in terms of going within was because we weren't allowed in buildings, essentially, like, we could have gone to a mall, but, no cafes, no restaurants, no entertainment venues, no sport, no yoga, no gym, no a lot of so even like my physiotherapist wouldn't service like the pain. A lot of the stuff I used for pain management, I couldn't access that kind of stuff. So because I actually genuinely couldn't get genuine pain needs met, and also couldn't go and fulfill all those kind of social appetites, um, what did I do? Same as you, got together with a community. We had a chat group as well, did hikes, did sitting in a park, chatting, did outdoor Pilates with a Pilates teacher who lost her job, stuff like that, and built a real sense of community. And what it made me realize was been, how much I had previously needed to stimulate me. So, I needed to eat out 3 times a week. I needed to go to, if it was festival season, like minimum 2 shows a week, or I'd have FOMO. And I realized that, like, that appetite had sort of gotten too big and too greedy, and it quietened down that appetite and made me really satisfied with the simple things. And I feel like that's had a lasting effect. Like, I don't need, like, I go to a show and I enjoy that afterwards now for months. Like, I don't need to be constantly topping up on the stimulation. Obviously, I didn't buy clothes for 6 months because I had nowhere to wear them. Um, you know, stuff like that. that had a really profound effect in a good way on me.
Yeah, well, it does strip away. In Victoria, Western Australia was totally different to South Australia. Anything government funded effectively shut doors. But you could go to a yoga
Right.
studio at one per whatever square meters or something ridiculous. And but as we know, the bottle shops were still open, but the gyms were shut. So for me, the signs of the no debate,
Yeah.
the signs of the hang on, as I just said, then you can go to a gym. Sorry, can't go to a gym or health, or in Victoria, exercise outside a 5K zone, but you can go to a bottle and you can go to a takeaway store. And Uber Eats runs
Yeah.
crazy. Do you find the hypocrisy and the irony? Was that a red flag?
100%. Because probably I was just all on board for the first lockdown, which was 3 months. And then after that, that was when I started to use the hashtag make it make sense quite a lot. Um, well, yeah, and having that background in the wellness space and my own holistic health journey, because with chronic conditions, generally that's the only thing that works. Um, I did sort of clock by heading into the latter half of 2020 that it didn't feel like this was really about health. And I did think that was weird. And particularly, I'll never forget when they brought in mask mandates here and we had to wear a mask at the beach in 35-degree weather, even if you went on your own. And it was being patrolled by police. And I was like, what the hell? Like, this is the worst thing you could possibly do if you're at risk of a virus is strap a, you know, nanoparticled, thing on your face and breathe that instead of all that beautiful ocean air. Yeah. And the only way I could get around that was, so if you were swimming, you didn't have to wear it. So I would do my beach walk wading in the water so that I could
In the
just
water.
breathe. Yeah. And I just remember thinking, this is fucked, for want of a better word.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense. And you talk about your journey with, you obviously had COVID and were in a process of obviously going through the El Salvador approach, which was
Yeah.
vitamin C, D, zinc, quercetin, and then also the so-called horse dewormer.
Yeah.
Even though it won a Nobel Peace Prize for
Use in humans. Yeah.
for use in humans, and the fact that no one now owns the patent is that they can't make money out of it. Did you dig too far into that? Well, did you dig into that? And obviously that went into the holistic approach, and you've talked about how you've experimented in different treatments for your health as well.
Yeah.
Was that, you
I
think, prepared you for it?
Yeah, totally. Because when you have a chronic condition and no one in the medical fraternity knows what to do with you, you have to start, you have to research really heavily and just look at all sorts of things and talk to people and make networks because, I just went to that many specialists who said, yeah, we don't know. So then what do you do? So you don't have any other options but to go and explore everything you can think of. And eventually you kind of work out, okay, you eventually you sort of work out how to tell the difference between some random quack Telegram post versus someone who seems to know what they're talking about, or um, you know, if there's a lot of anecdotal on a certain thing, you can check that out and then look for some empirical stuff and whatever. So I would say that gave me a really good grounding to look into treatments for COVID because, of course, once I worked out I can't take that shot, my next question was, well, what can I take prophylactically? Because you know, I don't agree that there's no such thing as COVID. Like I believe that people got sick from it, and I had 90 something year old grandparents. I wasn't gonna just laugh in their faces if they got it and be like, oh, whatever, it's my freedom. Like, of course I was gonna try to, make sure that if I'm sick, I'm not gonna go visit them. So I want to know if I'm sick, I want to take prophylactics, and I want to be able to, being also that I do tend to get sicker than others when I get things, I wanted to know how to treat it. So yeah, I did do that El Salvador thing.
Yeah, and also too with your health issues that you had. I also just saw a YouTube story which was on one of your earlier posts
Ah,
and on Substack
yeah,
about your experience with ayahuasca. So clearly,
yeah,
you, you're willing to go to the nth degree to find out the real answers, as opposed to the one stop shop. We're busy, we're manic. I need it. I don't know, got an infection, I need an antibiotic, or I've got a headache, I need a headache tablet. There's that
yeah,
thought, and people can do that, and but there are the causes and there's actually a real side to what can help.
yeah. I mean, I'm definitely, again, like, just having an upbringing where I'm quite open. I'm open to woo woo. Like, it doesn't. I'm open to it and checking it out. And that I mean, maybe if headache tablets worked for me, I would take them. That's the
Yeah,
thing, is like you go down these paths when the thing that you're being given doesn't work. So I did the ayahuasca thing because I'd been trying to find anything that would relieve the pain for 10 years and none of it worked. And so um I looked into it, and it did, like, there weren't it seemed like a fairly safe thing to try in the context that I tried it in. I did it with someone who was extremely experienced, in a very safe setting. And yeah, it's funny because you would know from watching it, it didn't work out how I'd hoped. I'd hoped that I would just have some revelation that would just make me better forever and I'd be fine and it would all be good. But that's not what happened. But it did lead me on a path of the mind body journey and understanding how um and sort of like the Joe Dispenza route, like understanding how what I think and what I say and the way that I talk to myself and the way that I process emotions can have actually quite a big impact on my experience of pain. So now I find it's not that the whatever the physical issues are have gone away, but I'm much better able to not escalate and go into these totally traumatic pain spirals that could just wipe weeks off your life and that kind of thing.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, you touched on yesterday when we briefly chatted and said, um, it's like taking the leap. You will be supported. How have
Yeah.
you found that?
Well, yeah. When we talked about it, I was saying, I just think at some point it comes back to the idea of authentically, this is the only thing I can do. So it was the pain stuff that gave me the window into this because I wasn't able to work a normal full-time job. I just physically couldn't do that, like sit in a chair for those lengths of hours. And you have good days, you have bad days. So at some point, I had to accept I have to do the kind of work that's flexible for me to go with what my body's doing. Um, and also, there are some weeks when I can't turn out a full time work week. I just physically cannot do it. And if you try to force yourself, it actually makes it worse. And then you lose weeks on the other end. So I had a therapist, and just, that was a big deal for me because I think of myself as highly competent. I'm energetic. I want to do the stuff. And it was a real surrender to kind of go, you just got to surrender to what is. You can't actually control this. So that was my level one of like, okay, well, for whatever reason, God has allowed this. Like, I don't understand it. I'd rather it not be this way, but it is this way. So, whatever I'm here to do, given that this has been allowed to be this way, it must be able to be done working from home, like not in this setting that everyone else works in. Like it has to. My contribution to the world has to fit in this format because it's the only way that my body can actually show up to do that. And then when all the COVID stuff happened and I committed to, I just remember thinking, well, I'll never get a job now at, like the ABC or whatever because of all the stuff that's published under my name. But I had the same thinking process where I was like, again, I can't authentically do any differently to this. So, and I really feel truly that this is what I'm meant to be doing. So if that's what I'm here to do, I 100% believe that you could say the universe, I say God, will support that, because it's what I'm here to do. So, and when I say support, I mean financially, I mean emotionally, like that what I need to be able to do this work will be provided. And I just really believe that, actually. And I think when you have that faith, it's that, I don't know, like there's always going to be exceptions to the rule, but I really do think that when you have that faith, that it does come. Can I ask you, did you have full confidence because giving up your job's a huge, like so many people weren't willing or able, and I think able was actually a big part of it too, but so many people weren't in a space where they felt that they could give up their day job. So did you have full faith, or did you just do it anyway, even without that?
I think fundamentally, like what you've said, I knew what my path was. I was witnessing stuff in a newsroom. For example, there was a massive protest out the front, and all the news and mainstream news, and particularly Nine, who I worked at, were focused on Denny Van Hagen, who was a Crows AFLW player, premiership player, was a nurse. We now find out down the track was wanting to have children, has now had children, and didn't want to go through it because I believe she was well informed. And I don't want to speak to her, and I've got a really good relationship with her. But I remember at the time I texted her and actually said, good on you for standing for what your thoughts are. And in hindsight, many periods later, we had a discussion. She goes, you know what, Tredrea, you're the only one that didn't ask me for an interview. Everyone texts wanting an interview. So there was quite literally, we talk about being on the first floor of Peerage Street in Nine Studios, and looking down there, and there's probably, 300 nurses protesting about mandates and bits and pieces. And we were streaming it into the newsroom and the recording set up. And then one of the senior sisters from the big hospital down south of Adelaide then comes out with this quote, and I'm not sure the number, but it was along the lines of 32 out of the 36 beds at Flinders Hospital, adolescent ward, are adolescents with vax injuries. And that stopped me in my tracks.
Friends at work in ICU at Flinders, 30 out of 38 patients currently are vaccinated. That is a fact, okay? The media is, I'm sorry, respectfully to the media, please start telling the truth, and please help us help you, because you are all targeted. Every single person. Serious adverse effects, serious. And we're talking 20-year-olds. We are talking 20-year-olds that have dropped dead. Nothing is getting on the media. Myocarditis is a rare, let me tell you, a rare cardiac condition. All of a sudden, every third 20-year-old's got myocarditis. You know what that leads to? Cardiac transplant.
I went and spoke to the news director. He said, well, yeah, we can't verify that. I then sat down and thought, hang on. Didn't pass, as my old manager would say, the sniff test. It doesn't smell right, there's something off. And I went back and said, hang on. So we listen to the government stuff, and I'm not questioning anything, but I'm just saying from a news perspective, you have to, I've always believed you tell both sides of the story, whether someone's a liar or someone's not. You let people decipher what they want to do. And hence why I'm now wanting to do a podcast and talking about a little bit of the other side of the world we don't see, and chatting to really inspirational people like yourself. And it was quite literally a situation where I said, well, hang on, I went back and I said, so this person made an allegation. Me as a father would want to know if I'm going to go ahead and vaccinate my kids, if there's a serious risk to adolescent kids. Well, we can't have time. We haven't time to verify along those lines. It was a total dismissal.
So they didn't even go and check it out.
No. And then later we then hear from, I spoke on this same podcast in my first episode, was with Senator Gerard Rennick, and he said it's well known that the government pharmaceuticals cannot fund media, that they can through the government. They were along the lines of his words. And I was just like, wow. So it was about money. And that's where, from me, all these things started to come out. You'd sit in the newsroom and you just before you go on to present, hey, coming up in sport, it'd always be an international COVID story. And I was sort of one of the, hang on, there was two of us who end up not being at Nine anymore. And He hasn't lived the public life, but he's a good fella, so he's just disappeared and off doing his thing that he loves. But obviously I took the public fight, and being on air, you get that. But when you sit there and for the first rollout is, if you get this, you won't catch it, you won't transmit it, you'll save grandma. To then 8 weeks later, it was, hang on, you can still catch it, but you'll get a lesser form. To then it was like, oh, you'll still catch it. Yeah, you can transmit it, but you won't die. But then the goalpost in footy terms just kept getting moved. And that's the bit that really stunk for me. And then eventually it was like, am I going to do it? And I actually thought multiple times I was going to do it, but I've family members with heart problems.
Yeah.
Even had someone we know die 2 weeks ago, and I don't know if this was the cause or not, but if you're better research than I am, but excess deaths are at 30% up, I'm hearing. So there's all these bits and pieces that for me, it just didn't pass the sniff test and add up. But fundamentally my decision, and everyone wants to say you're this, you're that, you're this, and you would have got the anti-vaxxer and you're the, you're endangering this, you're endangering that. I'd simplified it back to, okay, if I had a serious health issue, like say, for example, a cancer, I wouldn't expect my friend to get chemo to save me. You know what I mean? Like, this is just a simple, totally different way of thinking. But I was just like, hang on, isn't your body, your health, your own stuff to deal with you? And as it so worked out, that in the first week of January 2022, after I spent my Christmas break on holidays, I get an email through, I think it was on the 4th or 5th of January, contract terminated, employment terminated, then it was lead story, then it was all this stuff and people ringing you. I was actually sick, positive with COVID. So I was entitled to an exemption, but I didn't find out until an hour or 2 hours after.
Damn.
So the irony of this whole situation, for me, it was like, I'm not willing to do it. I knew it. Even when I had discussions with work, I said, it's only, I use the word emergency approved. It was only provisionally approved.
Yeah.
They're like, no, it's fully approved. Okay. It's only provisionally approved.
Yeah.
This the news outlet didn't even know. Or they chose not to know.
Crazy. Wow.
And that's where, for me, it was like the decision was, hang on. And we suffered a fair bit. We sold a house to get by and live. And like it's not like we sat
And
there
your
with excess funds.
family supported.
Oh, yeah, my wife.
Yeah.
An absolute warrior. So
how great that you were able to be on the same team, because you hear stories of couples where they weren't aligned.
We know one that the father went and vaccinated the kids because the wife didn't want it.
Wow.
And I say this, and I go back to it, and I didn't quite finish it. My decision was for me, not for anyone else. Because people, I'm always someone who is like, don't tell me what to do. Let me have a look show me the information, and then I'll make a decision. Or explain to me why we're going to do it. I'm very much one of the why people. But my decision was for me. I did not say to anyone else, don't get it. I didn't say any of that stuff. All I said is it's not for me. And even my doctor said with family history, it's not now. It's not no, but it's not now. But that's an amazing discussion in itself, how eye-opening it can be. But then you find out the money train. And you hear of stories, and I only spoke to someone on the way here, a high-profile reporter, talks about, they were reprimanded for saying stuff because the Victorian government wouldn't support the funding of the media outlet if they continue to have negativity. This is the bit and this is where I came across your work, because I'm sitting there going, oh, hang on, there's someone in the media that's awake and actually telling the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they really have. People get very upset with the journalists, and for sure, I mean, there were people like, I can't even really remember names now, and there's no point naming and shaming, but there were, except Ben O'Shea from the Western Perth Now. Disgusting attitude and behavior from him as a journalist. So there were some journalists that just went over the top, persecuting people that they don't understand, which I just think as a journalist is a truly disgusting thing to do, because your job is actually to try to understand it.
I made the comedy, the caricature in the New Adelaide Advertiser.
Yeah.
So it was Brenton Raglas as the male presenter, the Kate Collins was the female presenter, and I was the sports presenter. So they mocked up the picture of the news, and I probably should have sued them for it. Because they had Kate, they had Brenton, and they had a COVID germ sitting there. Now it's time for sport. They called me a virus.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's just some gutless twerp who wants to hide and fire off. No different to social media and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Dealing with kickback, like I just mentioned then, how have you dealt with it? And then how does the opportunity to go to the Brownstone Institute to be a contributor come about?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. So with any backlash, be it social or professional, I think at first I took it a bit to heart, especially because it was coming from the people I would have considered my peers or cohorts that I identified as being part of. So that was quite destabilizing. And at first I was like, what do you mean right wing? Like, what are you talking about? That kind of thing. But I think over time I really mostly laugh it off now because I'm just like, oh, if that's where you're at, that's fine. So I don't really sweat it anymore. And the Brownstone thing Brownstone Institute, based in the US, was founded actually out of the Great Barrington Declaration. So Jeffrey Tucker and Lou, I can't remember his last name, started it off the back of that. They were instrumental in getting the Great Barrington Declaration published, which was Jay Bhattacharya, Sunetra Gupta, and Martin Kulldorff advising essentially against these mass blanket lockdowns, saying that they'll do more harm than good, which they did, and they were right all along. So they publish a lot of heterodox stuff and they do fund fellowships, which provide a stipend to people like myself and academics who can no longer work in their institutions or journalists who can no longer work in mainstream. So I'm super grateful for that because I've been able to go full-time writing as a result of that. And they're a great community to be part of. There's a lot of really interesting, really smart people in that group.
What do you say to someone who might be a young journo, for example, that's working in mainstream media, and I've witnessed it many times? Here's the story. Go and do it. Who might feel, hang on, I don't have the confidence to step outside the bubble. Ethically and authentically, it's good, but it's not right. It might be 70-30, getting caught having discussions or not telling one side of the story when you actually think there's something else to it. Have you got any words of advice?
No, because I've never been in that situation. I didn't work in corporate newsrooms. And as far as I can see from speaking to people who have been in that situation, there's nothing you can do. You either have to leave. Like if you're a junior, there's no path out of that. You either say yes or you leave, essentially. And, David Southwell, who was at the Daily Mail, did a guest post a month or two ago on my Substack about why the media failed during COVID. And he was very frank, and he's since lost his job. So that's what happens when you do say what you're seeing is you either get fired, or I know another person who was working in that sphere and just got to the point where they were like, I don't want to name and shame citizens. I don't want to do this really mean-spirited kind of just shaming kind of journalism, and her only option was to leave. So I actually think if we want journalists to have the latitude to push back or have any input whatsoever outside of the most senior ranks, obviously, because Adam Crichton would be someone who was able to push back, and he was very good on the lockdowns, but he's senior, so he had the ability to do that. I think there have to be more independent, high-quality independent media publishing, and the US has quite a good ecosystem in that regard. They've got The Intercept, The Grey Zone. In the UK, there's Unheard, and then you've got all the well-known independents like Matt Taibbi who are also doing great work. But in Australia, I would say it's a desert in that regard. And this is one of the reasons that the Brownstone support, Marianne Damasi is another one who you might know from South Australia, who's another fellow at Brownstone, because we haven't got anyone to work for. There's no one to work for here who would allow us to have any say in that respect, if that makes sense.
But do you think clearly, I look at TV ratings, mainstream. I look at viewerships. I look at my children. We've got a blended family of 5 kids. The only time they sit on the TV is to watch Netflix. Or they've got YouTube, they've got a phone, trying to be one of those parents that doesn't, but good luck with that. My son and stepson watch live sport, NBA, football. Other than that, it's YouTube, Snapchat, TikTok. Do you think we get to a stage now where clearly COVID has woken a lot up from the information battle and the information war, I see it? Do you think we get to a stage where it turns independent and the grips of reality or the grips of the hold? Because if COVID happened for me, it happened 2020, obviously, and we're still feeling the effects forever because of the debt. Do you think what happens if it was in the 80s or the 90s? There would have been no alternate voice, because if you look at a town where you've got news papers, you've got 6 p.m. news on TV, you've got radio, that effectively was the COVID information. It was only the social media via X and Twitter for that, and then Substack, and that was able to get that information out.
Yes, although since in the last, say, 40 years, there's been a lot of local news services have also shut down. So what you would have had back then, better funded and with better circulation, to the best of my understanding, is actually local news, producing local news stories. And I think that was something that we were missing, and that's where the citizen journalists stepped up. Because, the only reason that I started to question, aside from the make it make sense, and none of this makes sense, but in terms of really questioning, I was doing witness statements, essentially, like documenting stories for Jab Injuries Australia. And I did that many interviews that I started to realize that the official stats couldn't be right, because there was this really elitist thing that happened during COVID, where if it wasn't like empirical data produced, or not, if it wasn't like statistical data produced by a medical or scientific doctorate, that it doesn't count. Well, my degree's in the social sciences, and I fundamentally disagree with that. I think that both anecdotals and like thick descriptions both that and your statistical quantitative evidence have place, and you actually need both to generate an understanding of what's going on in the world. So what I was discovering through this informal, I guess, research process of just interviewing, and always the same format, I was learning things like, wow, the vast majority of people I speak to turn up at emergency departments and get told they're anxious and go home, and then later get diagnosed with myocarditis, but like way later. And these are the people that went back 7 times. So what happened to the people who never went back, for example? So, through, how did I get onto that? Oh, what I'm saying is, so yeah, obviously the citizen journalists stepped up with those stories, but you may have 40 or 50 years ago had those stories appearing in local news, actually, because that would have been what was happening in the community. And as you say, what the large news corps did was they completely dismissed this on the ground testimony, which I agree that you don't just believe it on face value and say, oh, a random nurse said something, it must be true, but you check it out. And if it contradicts what the government's saying, you find out why. And that's what they just weren't doing. And I think that lack of local news has been really detrimental to the news environment overall. But yeah, I think that's why the decentralized news has taken off, and why the centralized news is not performing so well because it's lacking what everyone's like seeing with their own eyes around them.
Yeah, and clearly in that journey, obviously doctors, and particularly some specialists, have protected earnings as opposed to doing fundamentally right. You would have seen that firsthand with the safety data. But how does one go, I want to find the safety data? Who do you approach? Do you email? Do you call? Do you know what I mean? Because you need to, there's all these things going on in the world, who to call and what to do. It's a little bit like call the Ghostbusters, if you know what I mean, back in the day.
It takes a lot of digging. I mean, Western Australia actually produced a report. So I was able to publish some stories based off that report. But when I've tried to get data that's not published, the government departments are very resistant and tend to block you in any number of ways. Usually, they say, it's not in the public interest, or they say, it will take too long and it's a diversion of resources, so we can't do it. Or they say, well, that document doesn't exist. We would have to pull data from two sources, so we can't do that. There's a lot of, and we've seen, so for example, New South Wales was the only one publishing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 doses. And that was one of the big scandals that no one would have ever read about in the legacy media. But that was one of the big scandals of COVID, was that according to New South Wales figures, after an initial very short period of seeming effectiveness of the vaccines, it completely reversed. And many weeks there were 0 people who were unvaccinated in hospital. But the hospital was absolutely chockers with people who had had 3, 4, and 5 shots. So, we tried to get that. Lots of people have tried to get age stratified data to drill down into, like, well, can we actually prove did the vaccine work? Did it not work? Which you could prove if you had age. Well, you certainly could get a good picture of if you had age stratified data, because obviously age is the biggest factor there in terms of COVID outcomes. But they blocked it so hard. I mean, one woman went all the way to tribunal and was tied up with them, I think, for 18 months trying to get it. And then they said, we deleted it and never saved it. And it's like, really? I don't think so. So yeah, they go to great lengths to block you from getting it. So yeah, you dig and dig and dig. And then often, I mean, I've got a Freedom of Information request that the TGA mucked me about for about 4 months. And then I've gone to the Office of the Information Commissioner, and I've been waiting. It was the 25th of March. So I initiated that in December. So that's been 4 months. And to the best of my knowledge, they haven't even started reviewing it yet. And every time I check in, I get a generic like, oh yeah, we're really busy. So, there's a lot of brick walls. You've got to get good at dusting yourself off when you hit a brick wall.
Yeah, they're the first people, the governments, who want to come in and put in bills like mis and disinformation.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that ironic, given that they're the biggest source?
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where do you see, well, here's this the way. Who's the most powerful, the government or the dollar?
Oh. Well, the problem is that they're working hand in glove. So I don't know the answer to your question, but the whole public-private partnership thing is operating, it seems to me, in a sort of fascist way. I read a few articles actually, on public health, global public health as like neo-colonialism, and that's kind of how I'm seeing it. And the power base for that is public-private partnerships. So, the dollar couldn't do the people with the money wouldn't have this much power if the governments weren't giving it to them. But the governments are totally in on this and it seems to be favourable to them too.
Now, I talked about it beforehand, before off air. Some of the articles you've written, want some quick answers and real quick explanations as to
rapid fire.
A bit of rapid fire. Paid ambassadors for COVID. Andrew Bogut spoke out that he was offered money and said no. How do you look on those people?
Offered money for what? Sorry.
Promoting COVID vaxxers, doing ads.
Oh, and Andrew Bogut said no. Good on
He
him.
said no. A friend of mine I know is an influencer said no.
How do I look on those people? Well, so I do have a marketing background, so I'm kind of like, I get it. It's just like that's how influencers make money. What I don't like about it is, and I mean, people market health supplements all the time. So in a sense, I'm like, I get it. I don't like it when the government pays for advertising for the pharma companies. And I don't like the pharma companies paying influencers, but I also understand that a lot of these people might genuinely not understand the risks and the harms and so on and so forth. Like if I were going to be in that position, obviously I'd say no because of what I know. Probably also, even if I didn't know what I know, I still know that pharma cartels are like the most corrupt and criminal group on the planet. So I probably still would say no. Yeah, so I probably look at those people as ill-informed, in an ecosystem that I don't want to be any part of and don't really think highly of. But then again, I'm not someone who's going to go get a shot because Pink told me to. So yeah, look, I just actually wish that singers would just sing, actors would just act. Like, I'm not interested in what Sean Penn thinks about Ukraine. I'm not interested in what a footballer thinks about, like, the whole during COVID, everyone was like, are you a medical professional? Are you a scientist? Well, maybe we should apply that to footballers. I'm thinking of Travis Kelce, what about Mr. Pfizer? Maybe we should apply that back to these people who are marketing, new technologies to their fans. That's what I think.
No, good call. Social media bills,
Yeah.
government. Does it stink?
You mean
The
like
under
the
16 one that's
misinformation?
rolling. Is that the first step to
Uh,
something bigger?
I have mixed feelings on that because I totally see the concerns around digital ID and identification with biometrics and whatnot, and I oppose that. At the same time, I have read a fair bit of Jonathan Haidt, and I do agree that the too much, like I do agree it's a problem. This kids being affected by smartphones and social media. I just think that what I notice about the Australian government, they've got two things they do. One is, but particularly the Labor Party, just ram things through without thinking about them properly first. So I don't support that. I don't support the way they did it. Yeah, they rush things through and they limit debate. And I do think it's interesting that there was an inquiry. Sarah Hanson Young had a lot to do with running it, I think, into social media. And this was just before Labor tabled its laws about the under 16s. And the conclusion of the inquiry was we don't recommend a blanket ban. And I didn't see that Labor dealt with that conclusion at all or offered really much reasoning as to why they weren't taking on the conclusion of this huge inquiry that was conducted. So, I have more issues with the way it was done. And I also think that this particular government just sees sort of like blanket bans and really like more government, more regulation as the answer to everything. And I think I agree on the diagnosis of the problem. I'm not sure. I have mixed feelings about the solution, but I'm very certain that the way it was done was really shady.
And just before I leave you go, the big discussion around the vaccine stuff, is there DNA contamination or is there not? What have you found? Because the
There
government
is.
says no.
Yeah, I mean, it seems obvious to me that there is. The WHO actually in their own documentation uses the term contamination. So there's always been known to be a level of DNA contamination in vaccines. The government, the Australian government, and also regulators overseas, they insist that it's not. Well, actually, the TGA said it's not contaminated. And what they meant by that was a semantic game, because the TGA is very into semantic games. where they meant, there's residual DNA from the product process, but because we expect it to be there, it's not contamination. Well, WHO does call it contamination. I'm going to go with what they say. And the argument is over whether it's too much, like over regulatory limits or under regulatory limits. And so it keeps getting found in over regulatory limits by PCR testing and fluorometry, so 2 types of testing. And the TGA keeps rebutting the fluorometry testing, saying, we don't approve of that method, but then they just never address the PCR testing, which they do approve of. That is the approved method. So yeah, I mean, it seems, I also think like with the level of obfuscation that's coming from the TGA, I'm not going to take their word for it, that all these independent findings are just wrong because they said so. I think my assessment at the moment is yes, contaminated, yes, with levels above regulatory limits. Obviously, there's some batch variability. Some batches will probably be below, but there seem to be enough that are over for it to be a serious cause for concern.
And you're probably watching on from afar what's happening in American politics with Trump and RFK Jr. RFK is that some people just seem to think that making America healthy again is not a good thing. And do you think that could eventually jump the ocean and come to us, that we start to sharpen our act politically?
Yeah, I don't know, because I feel like the difference between Australia and the US is we've really got quite a uniparty on, there's some difference between the parties, like Liberal wants to do nuclear, whatever. Like there's a few differences, but I think that we don't have a party, a major party that represents the populist vote at all. And Labor and Liberal both seem really aligned when it comes to establishment versus the people. That's just how it looks to me as not a political scientist. So in terms of how much, I mean, I think the US, of course, does influence us, and I'm very pleased to see discussion of things like food dyes and that RFKJ wants to get some better science and whatnot. But I'm not sure that we're similar to America in the partisan sense.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Keep doing the good stuff. And for people who want to check out all your work, Dystopian Down Under on Substack, Rebekah Barnett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you liked it. And hey, we'd love to hear from you too. So drop us a comment. And stay tuned for the next episode of The Ballsy Show.